Hello, everybody. This is Ken Krogh, president and founder of InsideSales.com. I have the privilege and opportunity to introduce to you Craig Elias. He's the creator of Trigger Event Selling and the author of the award-winning sales book Shift, which is the harnessing trigger events that turn prospects into customers. I've had a wonderful conversation with Craig. He's helped me to understand what trigger events are and how they help you be at the perfect place at the perfect time and do it on purpose. It's sort of that perfect storm of sales opportunities, the silver bullet that we stumble into by luck, and he teaches us how to recognize it and do it based on the right timing. Now, he has written the book that I mentioned is a big opportunity that has been the #1 selling book on both Amazon and the Wall Street Journal. His knowledge of trigger events has resulted in a 20-year track record as a top sales performer. He won $1 million prize in a global billion-dollar idea competition based on this. It was covered on NBC, the New York Times, and in the Wall Street Journal. And his last company was chosen by Dow Jones as one of the 50 most promising companies in North America. Thanks, Craig, for joining us, and take it away, Craig.
Ken, my pleasure. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon if you're listening in from Europe. As Ken says, my name's Craig Elias, and for 20 years, I was just this lucky sales guy. I just had this unbelievable knack to be in the right place at the right time, and it happened again and again and again for 20 years. And then one day it stopped, and I couldn't figure it out. So I took some holiday time that I had coming to me, and I took a month of afternoons, and I reflected on 20 years of success. When was I good? When was I great? And when was I just unstoppable? I figured a few things out. I built the company that Ken talked about. I was down in California for about a year, became a dad, came home, and I kept getting asked to share what I had figured out about how to I get lucky for 20 years. So I took what I learned and I put it into a book. And I was very fortunate that when the book came out, it actually won an award as one of the top sales books of the year, right behind Jill Conrad's book. And I was also lucky that I had some really cool people that said some great things about the book. And part of what I learned when I reflected on my 20 years of success is that sales is all about getting the pole position. As you can see here, that guy in the front in pole position 1 on the blue and yellow car, this is Formula One, there is a statistic that in Formula One racing, the person who wins the pole position wins the race greater than 50% of the time. When it comes to sales, the same thing is true. If you get the pole position and do the right thing with the right people at the right time, the odds you win the sale on average are 74%. Now, for those people that have been selling for a while, they're probably pretty familiar with this term called BANT, budget, authority, need, and timeline. And then what we used to do is we used to wait until somebody had all of those things because we knew if we went too soon, they weren't ready to buy. We had to wait until they got to this point. Then they're ready to buy. But it turns out in the world today where customers are doing a lot of research before we get involved, yes, by the time they get all those things, they're more likely to buy. The challenge is if we wait till they have all of those things, they're much less likely to buy from us. So let me share with you what it takes, I think, to be successful from a sales perspective today. One of the first things I figured out in my month of afternoons of reflections is that when I was out there selling, the people I'm selling to or were selling to were always in one of 3 different buying modes. First one's called status quo. This is when someone's happy with what they have and sees no reason to change. You can think of this as some form of what is called path dependency. People have done the same thing the same way for so long, it just simply keeps doing the same old thing. And that when you find somebody who's in this buying mode of status quo, the vast majority of times, the odds that someone becomes our customer in the next little while is pretty much 0. And when I reflected upon my sales some more, my success, I look back and I realized that sometimes I got to people while they're in this buying mode of what is called searching for alternatives. Here, people are unhappy with what they have, and they're actively doing something about it. The research that I've seen says that if you get to somebody when they've already got budgets while they started this process of searching for alternatives. The research I've seen says that the odds you win this sale is about 1 in 6 or maybe 1 in 7. The challenge is that if you wait until someone has budget authority and need, it's too late because 70% of the decision has already been made before they even pick up the phone and call you. So the secret is, how do you find a way to get to people between these two common buying modes? And this was my first epiphany in the summer of 2002. What I figured out was that every single 6, 7, 8-figure deal that I could remember, I got to someone between those two commonly known buying modes, what I now call a window of dissatisfaction. Here, people are unhappy with what they have, but so busy solving other problems, they haven't gotten to this problem yet. And when I did my research into 2003, the research said that if you got to these people before the competition, and if you helped them define the problem, design the solution, and you started developing the relationship, you won the business on average 75% of the time. You were 5 times more likely to win the business when you got to someone when they hadn't figured out what the real problem was. It turns out that in 10 years, things really haven't changed. A little while ago, I was fortunate enough to be on a webinar with some people from Forrester, and they did some research with decision makers. And they asked the question, how often do you give the business to the person who gets in early and helps you, as they say, define the buying vision? And it turns out that if you get in first and make that happen, you win the business on average 74% of the time. So in the last 10 years, this has not changed. For me, though, it's not just about winning the sale. It's about getting the best customers. Because if you find people at exactly the right time, they're loyal, they're profitable, and they give us what we all want, testimonials, referrals, and word of mouth. I want to share some insights as to why this is so important. So in 1996, I read a book by a guy named Frederick Reichheld. He talked about the impact of finding loyal customers, and he says that a simple 5% increase in customer loyalty can double your profit in less than 5 years. So that's the impact of loyalty. What's the impact of finding someone who's more profitable? Well, the research by the people over at Wiley says that, you know what? A simple 1% increase in price leads, on average, to an 11.1% increase in profit margins. So that's the impact of finding more loyal customers who are more profitable. But one of the cool things is they tell their friends. And from what I've heard from Jonah Berger, word of mouth is more than 10 times more effective than traditional advertising. And the last time I saw him present, he gave a statistic, I think was by McKinsey. He said that word of mouth delivers twice as much revenue as every other form of marketing combined. So I'm a big believer there is such a thing as a silver bullet in sales. It's this thing called timing. It's this magical ability to reach the best prospects at exactly the right time. And I bet that if you look back at some of the customers you've had success with, it's already happened to you before. And if you were to look back, I have a sheet you can get from windowofdissatisfaction.com. There's a number of resources on the left. But if you made a list of the customers you won recently, and you made a list, and you went down this list, and you figured out by putting a check mark next to them which ones happened quickly, which ones were easier, which one had a higher price, which ones were willing to be a reference, those that had 3 or more check marks next to their name, those are the people that in the past you got to them while they're in this window of dissatisfaction, unhappy with what they have, but not doing anything about it yet. The challenge is, how do you make timing happen? Because brute force doesn't work. You can't keep calling your customers all the time. Are you ready to buy? Are you ready to buy? Are you ready to buy? The research by McKinsey says too much contact by phone or email is what drives them crazy, and that is what diminishes the relationship more times than anything else. But you've got to figure out how are you going to reach people, because they don't do things from an annual budget perspective. They don't decide at the beginning of the year how they're going to buy everything. The research that I've seen says that 77% of all purchases in corporations are unplanned. Something all of a sudden changes someone's priority, and now they decide to buy something different. The dilemma is you got to find a way to get in before they start searching, because on 75% of occasions, the decision maker has made their decision by the time they're halfway through the process. So you got to figure out, how do you find a way to reach people at the right time? And this is when I had my second epiphany, rather. So you got to figure out, how do you reach people at exactly the right time? So my first epiphany in the summer of 2002, there was this thing called a window of dissatisfaction. I never noticed it. Now I knew it was there. Second thing I figured out is that people change because some trigger causes them to leave the status quo and move into the window of dissatisfaction. So the question is, what is this trigger? I think the most important thing that people understand, though, is this trigger is an event. It is not a change in circumstances. So here's a married man going bald. Every day he gets up older, heavier, grayer, balder. But he doesn't go out and buy Rogaine, or if you're in Europe, Regain, the steroidal cream you put on your scalp that makes your hair grow, until he experiences a very specific event. And that event is becoming single. When he becomes single, he drives a new car, goes to the gym, buys new clothes, and goes and gets Rogaine. From what I'm told, a different example, life insurance. From what I'm told, there is one single event that drives more people to buy life insurance than every other event combined. And that event is when someone gets pregnant. All of a sudden, you get a new car, you change where you live, you get a will, you get life insurance. So I'm going to give you some examples to make sure you understand the difference between a circumstance and an event. A circumstance might be someone's falling stock price or shrinking margins. Maybe for some reason they're unhappy with their current solution. But that's not enough to cause someone to change their priorities and all of a sudden buy something different. That takes an event that triggers all this stuff. So some examples of trigger events. There's a change in decision makers. I love a change in decision makers in accounts. A new decision maker in an account is on average up to 10 times more likely to become your customer than the person who was there before. If someone wins a large customer contract, now they have more money, they can afford to change. You probably have some of these customers that want to change but can't afford to. As soon as they have this event where they can afford to change, they're on average up to 8 times more likely to become your customers. Sometimes one of your prospects' competitors launches a new product. This then becomes the justification for them to make changes inside an organization. Or a vendor that they use, or a competitor gets acquired. One of the other things I think is worthwhile watching is you watch all your competitors in your accounts and you watch for a change in salespeople. When that salesperson moves on, the relationship that was there has been severed. New person takes the role, doesn't understand the decision maker's expectations, doesn't have a great relationship. Because they don't understand their expectations, they're more likely to disappoint them. Because they don't have a relationship, the decision maker is less likely to complain. These are all great opportunities. So these trigger events come in 3 forms. First form is all of a sudden someone decides they want to change. You can think of this as a funnel filler. And then all of a sudden somebody can afford to change. This moves someone down the funnel. But it's not until they have the last event where they can justify the change that they will then become your customers. So I figured all this about in 2002, and I was really happy that in 2009 I saw McKinsey had done some research. And they'd done research on 20,000 consumers in 5 industries and 3 continents. And what they realized was the exact same thing. There's an event that causes someone to become unhappy with what they have, and they create this initial consideration set. Who are they going to then perhaps buy from? And then later on they have a trigger at the end, which is they make a decision to do something. The only thing that's missing from, I think, from McKinsey's model is this other trigger where someone can afford to change, where they start the process now of doing something with it. They can afford the time to talk to you or the money to buy what you have. In 2011, I saw some really cool research by Google. And Google had come out with this thing they call the 0 moment of truth. They looked at marketing and they saw these first and second moments of truth, but they figured out there was a first moment of truth where someone starts considering what are they going to use. And they talk about this 0 moment of truth as being created by a stimulus. What you now know is this stimulus is a trigger event, and that they have to have additional events as they move through this process. So far I talked a little bit about business-to-consumer stuff, but I did that so you get what I'm talking about. This stuff all applies to business-to-business selling. And the research Google did, they came out with a great quote that says, you know what, we've seen enough data to know that C-level executives, CTOs, CEOs, COOs, CSOs, CMOs, they do their own search queries before they meet a vendor. Some of the biggest companies on the planet, they get this. GE is one of these people. They understand that this zero moment of truth, or being part of the initial consideration set, it applies to both business to consumer and business to business selling. The cool thing is that these resources that you can learn about the zero moment of truth, they're all free. So you can go to zeromomentoftruth.com. You can follow Jim Lisinski. And on my own blog, I actually have a process right now where I'm going through the 7 best ways to use the zero moment of truth in B2B selling. So the whole idea here is you want to find a way to reach decision makers when they have that first event, they want to change, they have not talked to any of your competitors yet. When someone has that event and they want to change, it takes an account that you tried to get in, one that was like Fort Knox. All of a sudden, someone who would never call you back or respond to an email, they call you back, or they respond to an email. What happens when someone has this event and they want to change? It adds one more thing to their to-do list. The problem is it's so far down the list that they just can't get to this problem yet. What also happens is they have this event and it turns on this thing called selective perception. It's like when you buy a new car, what do you start seeing all over the place? You see that exact car. When women get pregnant, what do they notice all over the place? Pregnant women. When you sell your car, you stop seeing your old car, you start seeing the new one. When women give birth to their children, they stop seeing pregnant women and they start seeing women with babies everywhere they go. The same thing happens to decision makers. All the stuff that was hiding in plain sight that they never noticed, all of a sudden now it's going to jump right out at them. One of the reasons that I love a change in executives is when there's a change in executives, they want to make things happen. They want to make things happen fast, and on average, they have very little or very few ties to the current vendor, and they're up to 10 times more likely to change vendors now. One of my favorite examples, although in this case it turned out to be a bad thing for one of my customers, was that there was a relationship they had with a very large healthcare company, and their relationship was with the VP of technology. It was their best customer, best reference, and then one day they hired a new CIO, and within 6 months, they were out of their best account in one of the best industries they were in. One of the important things, though, is to understand that just because there's been one event doesn't mean there's not more than one opportunity. When there's a change in decision maker, there's usually several opportunities. So let's pretend we've got this guy named Jeff who was a friendly, someone who bought stuff from you in the past. When he moves, he's moved to a place, odds are, where he's now got more money, more authority, more influence. You want to find a way to follow where he went, because if he was a customer in the past, odds are he'll become a customer again. You also want to figure out who's taken their place, because you don't want to lose the opportunity to keep a customer, or maybe it was an account you didn't get into or couldn't get into, and now someone new is going to be 10 times more likely to become your customer. And when you go see that person who's new in the role, I think the very first question you should ask is, where did you come from? Because they've left a position where there's also going to be someone new in the role and who's now up to 10 times more likely to become your customer. So every change in decision makers creates at least 3 different opportunities. The question is, how often do salespeople reach out? For all the sales executives on the call, we'd like to think that the vast majority of the time our salespeople are doing the work. Turns out that's not even close. In less than 7% of the cases was it the fact that the salesperson initiated the sale. So that was my second epiphany. People would be in status quo on Monday, the window of dissatisfaction on Wednesday, and searching for alternatives on Friday, because they had an event that pushed them between these pieces. But then I realized something, that for the first time in 20 years, instead of analyzing the business I had lost, I analyzed the business I had won. And I thought to myself, hey, that's interesting. I learned a ton of stuff. Maybe there's some research on the internet that will help me do a better job of this. So I did a search out of curiosity on the internet for the phrase sales analysis, those two words together in that order. And in the summer 2002, I found about 1 million pages on the internet that talked about sales analysis. But that wasn't what I'd done. I'd done something different. But I was still curious about this lost sales analysis that my managers had told me I should always do, because the theory was if you lose the business, you don't want to lose the lesson. So I did a search for the phrase lost sales analysis between quotes, and I found about 50,000 pages on the internet. But when I did a search for one sales analysis, again, that phrase, those three words in that order together, in the summer 2002, when I did a Google search, I found only 2 pages that talked about this. So I have a process called one sales analysis, because I'm a big believer that what we see depends upon what we look for. So what we want to do is we want to analyze our best wins. And our best wins are the ones we talked about earlier, those that had 3 or more check marks next to their name. Isolate those wins. Let's go do this analysis. I'll share with you now what the analysis should be. When you win a piece of business and the deal is no longer at risk, you want to figure out a few things. First of all, you understand now that someone had an event and all of a sudden there was a motion in making changes to what they already had. So the first question you ask in this one sales analysis is what event or what events led up to this purchase. The challenge, though, is as time goes on, this emotion dissipates. So you've got to find a way to get there sooner. And the whole idea here is you want to figure out when did these events happen. The reason we ask that second question is that when you ask the first question, you learn of the events where all of a sudden someone could afford to change. They now have budget. But you want to get there sooner. So you ask the question, when did these events happen? And when you ask that question, what you figure out and often learn is you understand what was the first event that made somebody want to change. Question number 3, what made you choose us? I did not ask a why question. I am told that why questions make people defensive. Some of your audience has this thing called context. You have content, they have context. And an even smaller set of that has what I call the ability to do mental gymnastics. They take your content, they apply their own context, they do the mental gymnastics, and they understand why is what you're selling relevant to them right now. The challenge is not everybody has enough context or can't do the mental gymnastics. You need to take that out of the heads of those that can figure it out and then spoon feed it to the rest of the marketplace. Question number 4 is all related to how do you make it easier to become a customer. When someone wants to buy from you, they've got to find you, learn the real value of becoming your customer, and then they actually have to make that purchase. There are hurdles. Sometimes they're yours, sometimes they're inside the organization. In order to be able to get to people at the right time, you've got to find a way to make it easier to become your customer. So let's ask our customers, what can we do to make it easier to become a customer? And the reason this is relevant is that, let's say it used to be, before you asked this question, it was relatively hard to become your customer. You had to reach them within 2 or 4 weeks of when they had the event, because if you don't reach them then, their emotion dissipates and they stick with the status quo. But if you make it easier to become your customer, you can reach people now instead of between 2 and 4 weeks of having the event where they want to change. Now it's 4 to 8 weeks. And then the last question. And I think in many ways the last question will be tailored by you. But one of my favorite last questions is I'm going to ask for an introduction to someone who's just had an event similar to the one that they experienced when they decided they want to change. So I would say, hey, Jim, I really appreciate this. Can I ask one last question? Who do you know who also just got a job as a Chief Information Officer? So you're going to learn at these events. I'm a big believer in what Dario says. Dario is the Chief Strategy Officer over at Richardson. He says, yes, it's challenging to know about these events, but the really important thing is to follow up before the opportunity slips away or the competition learns of them. So I'm going to share with you a few tools that I use to get there before my competition. The first tool I use is a product called iSell by a company called OneSource. They sell information about these trigger events and when they happen. So if you want to get in front of someone before the competition, this for me is one of the ways that you can make it happen. I'm also a big fan of LinkedIn. LinkedIn has what's called a saved search. You can save a search for Chief Marketing Officer, and every week you will get a list of people that now have that title in their profile. I've been on LinkedIn since the second week it got up and running. I'm user 3,956 of 250 million different users. If we're not already connected on LinkedIn, do you and me a big favor. I would love to find a way to connect on LinkedIn. Another tool I love to use is a tool called Tout App. It takes email and it puts it on steroids. This is one of the very few tools like iSell and LinkedIn that I use every single day in my selling efforts. If you're looking for a way to get more hours in the day, this is the only tool that I found that makes it happen. One of my other favorite tools is a tool called Bright Verify. What they can do is they can help you understand whose email address has bounced. So without having to send an email, too much contact, they take all the emails of your prospects, they can check them all, and they'll tell you which ones have bounced because they communicate with the mail servers, and it sends back a message. This one's good, this one's bad. Here's the thing, though. I think you can use Bright Verify not just to figure out who's changed within your prospects, but I think you should check out all the email addresses of everybody who's already a customer or a contact in your customers, because you'll then know when one of those people has changed jobs. You can follow them to their new place, because now they've gone somewhere else. Odds are they will become your customer again. So for me, that's how you win the business 74% of the time. You find a way to leverage events, get in front of the right people at the right time, as Forrester says, set their buying vision, or as I would say, help define the problem, design the solution, and develop the relationship. There's a bunch of resources that I list on the left. If you'd like a copy of my slides, just fill in the form at shiftselling.com/slides. I will send you my native PowerPoint slides from this presentation.